are you doing?
Okay, let me take you on a journey that I've been going through myself for the last couple of years and kind of tell you the story of how I got here and what I want you to help me with. I should say this is my second time giving a talk in person since 2019. I'm still confused about it a little bit. When I gave talks on Zoom, if I spoke too fast, I could blame the buffering issue. This time, it's like going to actually be me. If you ask a question, I can't say that you need to unmute yourself. It's going to be actually in person. So we'll see how I fare in this event. So I'm a neuroscientist. I studied the brain. And today I want to talk to you about a project that I've been carrying with me for the last couple of years that seemingly, when it started, had nothing to do with the brain and gradually evolved into me figuring out how the brain comes together here. So it started in 2017, about 5 years ago, when I was hosting a panel, kind of like the ones you see at DLD. And this panel had the two recipients of the Nobel Prize of 2017, the Peace Prize and the Physics Prize, and we talked about their work, about winning the Nobel Prize, and I asked them towards the end a question that seemed mundane, but it actually ended up being very telling. I asked them, now that you got the Nobel Prize, and you have all this power, and your words mean so much, what do you want to do with it? Like, what do you want to change in the world? What do you want to impact? And they said, independently, but collectively, nuclear weapons. We think that there's a big problem with nuclear weapons, and we want to use our power to change something about how people think of nuclear weapons. And this caught me off guard. I didn't know much about it, and I said, okay, that's interesting. I remembered that a year prior, when President Obama was in office, he was asked in an interview, what keeps you up at night? And even though there were a lot of things happening in the world right now that could have been the things that kept him up at night, he said the nuclear weapons in Pakistan, which again seemed like a topic that I, as a person who knew a lot about US politics, didn't see coming. And what I remembered in both those conversations, the one when I heard Obama speak and the one when I heard the Nobel Prize recipients, is that I said, oh, that's interesting, that's alarming, I didn't think about it, I should think about it more, and then I forgot about it and moved on. Fast forward to January 13, 2018. If you were in the US that morning, if you specifically were in Hawaii that morning, at 8:07, you would have gotten on your phone a text message from the government that said, a ballistic missile carrying a nuclear warhead from North Korea is on its way to Hawaii, please find shelter. Now, this was a fluke, it was a mistake. Some intern probably lost his job because of this problem. But what I was mostly surprised by is how everyone assumed it could happen. People in Hawaii didn't say it must have been a mistake, didn't say, okay, there's a problem here, clearly it's not right. Military bases went into high alert mode, people actually went to the shelter. Everyone assumed that randomly one morning we could have a nuclear attack coming at us, and that's plausible. After half an hour, it ended and people moved on. And again, I, like many people, thought, oh, that's interesting. It's a real thing, but never mind, let's move on, and forgot about it. And fast forward again, a few months later, I was involved in a project where, as a neuroscientist, I was asked to help the Transport Security Authority, the TSA, the ones at the airport that checks your baggage in this machine, train their employees to think about the unimaginable. Basically, what the TSA said is that a typical employee, a typical person of the authority who is working for them, probably will not see a bomb ever in their life. Right? Bombs, maybe if they ever appear, they appear 1 in a billion suitcases. So most employees will never see them. And then the worry was that they are going to get used to just kind of pressing next, next, next on the suitcases and miss the one time it happens. And the TSA asked us, neuroscientists, is there a way to train the brain to think about things that are very unlikely? In the particular case, the advice we gave them is to put dummy suitcases in the machine. So a TSA person sits there, and occasionally, every couple of minutes, they see a suitcase in the machine that actually is a bomb that we plant there, and they're supposed to press a button, and if they don't, we kind of punish them, and if they do, we tell them they did a good job. This is how we make them see a lot more than the actual numbers, so their brain is trained for this idea. But this made me think about nuclear weapons. And the idea that our brain is really flawed when it comes to thinking about unimaginable things. See, our brain lives in a very small sliver of reality. We can't really imagine very small things like quantum particles because they're just not in the proportion that our brain captures. We can't really imagine really big things like the universe or infinity or stars or planets that are far away. We have a hard time imagining how it will be to be in the body of someone else. This is why we have challenges with empathy many times. We have a hard time imagining things that are far geographically. What happens right now in a different place is really hard for us to capture. We have a hard time thinking about things that are far temporally. If you ask a young person how it would be to be a 60-year-old, they kind of say, well, it's like me, but I'm 60 now. That's about it. They can't really progress and project themselves in the future. And most of us have a really hard time thinking about things with very low probability. If we are asked something about the probability of 0.00001, our brain essentially makes it 0. It says it's never going to happen, let's not just think about it. And this is how I and a lot of people thought about nuclear weapons, something that will never happen, and we shouldn't worry about it. But because I had those events that reminded me what nuclear weapons could look like and how it could work, I said, maybe I should venture into this field. Maybe I should apply my knowledge about the brain and help not just TSA people, but also leaders, like CEOs who have to make critical decisions once in a lifetime, or people who have to make decisions that are critical once in a lifetime in different domains, make better choices. Specifically, I said, what if we could look at the nuclear protocols that the US and other countries use and implement what you know about the brain in such a way that helps people think about them differently? So I did what neuroscientists and academics do. I applied for a grant to revisit the nuclear protocols, and immediately was rejected because people said, what do you know about it? Like, you're a neuroscientist, this is not the field, and also, you don't know anything about nuclear. We don't want you involved in that. And so I took to heart the rejection, and I said, well, they're right about one thing, which is I don't know much about it. Let me learn about the history and the way the decision came about. So I went back 70 years and learned about the way by which the protocol that we use right now in most countries, namely in the US, came to be. Turns out that when President Truman was taking office and was tasked with kind of being in charge of the war that was happening, he was also handed the nuclear weapons that his predecessor kind of put to power. And at the time, the people who mostly were in charge of them were soldiers. When the president was asked to launch this bomb, he was told it's just a bigger bomb, essentially. It's going to make a big impact. It's a bigger bomb. Would you authorize it? And he just said yes. When the bomb actually landed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he himself was surprised, and he said, this is not just a regular bomb that's bigger. It's a weapon to kill children and women, was his words. And he immediately said, I don't want this weapon in the hands of soldiers. I think that they're going to be eager to use it. I want to take it away from them and put it in the hands of a civilian, a person who was elected, a person who would act as checks and balances. It took a few years to actually codify this idea, but essentially what happened was that we took this decision away from soldiers and put it in the hands of a civilian, one person, the leader of the country in the US, with the sentence that this person is going to be calculated, rational, and measured. Fast forward to the picture of Donald Trump walking into office, Boris Johnson, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-il. You can almost imagine one of the 9 people who are right now tasked with being responsible. And each of them, you can imagine a moment where they're acting not rational, not calculated, not measured, and doing something that's not likely. The moment that most kind of struck me as relevant was a moment that happened in the US on January 8, 2021. We all know what happened on January 6, 2021. This is in the news all the time. What's less known is that 2 days after this famous insurrection, General Milley, who basically was Donald Trump's chief general, the chief of Joint Chief of Staff, he was so alarmed by the events in the country that he called his counterpart in China and said, look, I'm worried that my boss is going to launch nuclear weapons towards you. I'm going to do whatever I can to stop it. But I just want to know that if it happens, I ask you not to start a war. It's going to be a mistake, and we're going to do our best to end it with just this one missile. Now, this story, of course, leaked through a book that was coming about the last couple of months of the Trump administration. There's no evidence that Trump actually considered doing that, but this story was enough of an alarm that the administration of Biden, when they took office, looked back at all the people who suggested to change something in the protocol, including me, and they called us back and said, okay, we're now happy to rethink this grant that you applied for a number of years ago. So we had a few weeks where we got this kind of knowledge that we're going to get a grant from a non-profit organization that cares about changing the work, the Carnegie Corporation. And specifically, one of the people on the team that I was with that applied for the grant was destined to become the Undersecretary for Defense Nuclear. So she was going to take the position that will be in charge of that. And in the 2 weeks since the day we kind of learned about the chances of a nuclear war happening, she also was tasked with briefing President Biden on how to prepare for nuclear war. So I asked her, I said, Deborah Rosenblum is her name, I said, I want you to brief me the same way you brief the president, outside of the classified information. Whatever you give the president, I want you to tell me. Give me all the documents, all the information. I want to be trained the same way he is trained, so I will know what do presidents know when they're learning to make decisions in the context of nuclear war. And so she did. And in the next 2 weeks, I basically learned how people in very senior positions think about events that are very unlikely, critical, fatal, and how they train for that. And the kind of behind the scene is that the answer is not really well. We don't really capitalize on all the knowledge that neuroscientists have brought to the world in the last 70 years that teaches us how to think about critical choices differently. So now that I knew that, I basically had more evidence that our job is necessary, and I started to think, how can I actually help the world in some ways? So what I did was I started to investigate ways to improve the protocol, specific ones and pragmatic ones, who speaks when, who talks to who. We started changing things, and we started also to introduce a lot of knowledge about the biases that are inherent in the protocol that we have right now, and also the biases that are not inherent. I'll give you an example to be concrete. On top of the fact that we know that humans are biased, and that it's very likely that in the moment of truth, when there are a lot of crises, people might not follow the protocol, might not do things the way they plan, and things might change, we also know that we have evidence that people violate the protocol itself. If you remember, in September 11, 2001, when George Bush was president, he was sitting in a classroom reading a book, The Pet Goat, to kids, when his chief of staff whispered in his ear, "Mr. President, the US or America is under attack." These were the words that were whispered in the ears of the president. It wasn't told to him that it's airplanes hitting buildings. It wasn't told. What he was told is, "Mr. President, America is under attack." This could have been a nuclear attack. These were the same words that you would have gotten if you were told that a nuclear attack is happening. And even though the protocol says specifically that the president is supposed to start basically a countdown timer of 15 or 20 minutes, and he needs to go and start giving order and learning stuff, George Bush, rightfully in my mind, chose to not panic and stay in his seat and finish reading The Pet Goat to the kids for 6 more minutes before he closed the book and went away to the other room to kind of learn what's going on. So the protocol is essentially saying that you have 15 minutes to decide, and they thought about every minute, who talks to who in every minute and what gets written and so on. George Bush, the one time that he had the chance to kind of reflect this protocol, chose to spend 6 of those 15 minutes reading The Pet Goat. And in that sense, I think that what we learned is that the protocol not only is flawed, it also might not be followed in the time of crisis. So this needs to be changed. And we had many ideas on what could be changed and how to change it, but those ideas were academic. So we started writing papers, and we started basically doing experiments and learning how to kind of implement them. And this all changed about 2 months ago when the war in Ukraine began. Suddenly, things started to look a lot more grim, and those 0.00001% things became 0.1. Suddenly, people started to think about it. So we back to the days where I said, hey, why do we not think about it that much? Because it doesn't really happen. That, okay, it could happen. And a lot of things happened in the last couple of months that really changed how we think about it. First of all, the idea of nuclear war was normalized, meaning something that we thought would never happen started to be on the headlines of CNN every couple of days. We also started hearing words like mini nukes. So a word of mini nukes emerged, which is a way to normalize the idea that, yes, it's going to be a nuclear bomb that we're going to launch at other countries, but because it's mini nuke, it's not really a nuke, so don't worry about it. Like, don't respond the same way. And this mini nuke is just a new invention of a PR agency that says basically it's a bomb that if we launch, we didn't start a war, so don't respond in the same way. Just to be clear, mini nuke, which you may have heard in the news, is the bomb that was launched at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because now we have big nukes which are much bigger. We also started hearing about countries that we didn't think are in the game playing in a game. So Australia said they want to develop nuclear weapons. Ukraine, of course, regretted giving up their nuclear weapons. South Africa, who also had nuclear weapons, said that they made a mistake. And other countries started to speak about it. It suddenly became a thing that other countries starting to kind of escalate in their homeland. And this idea of game theory with 2 countries that now turned into 3 countries or 9 countries becomes a much harder thing when you have more and more countries playing. And more than anything, I think that one of the things that changed is that people started listening to scientists. So suddenly my work got a lot of attention. And one of the things that we suggested early on in the decision tree was to maybe include technology in the process of decision making. Now, as soon as we said that, everyone right away laughed at us and said, forget about it, this is never going to happen. We don't want AI in the room, and like that's not going to happen. Like we're not going to have a machine involved in critical decisions. And while I agree with this right away, I didn't like the arguments that came to us from the people in the military and the Pentagon who kind of argued against that. Because their argument was, we want humans, which are much smarter and much more rational, much more measured, to be responsible for the decision. And we knew right away that humans, on most exchanges, actually fall short of machines on decision making. The example I want to give you that will kind of help you understand it happened here in Munich a few years ago, where a colleague of mine, Professor Sharon Wiener, ran an experiment. The Munich Defense Conference happened right here a few years ago, and she ran an experiment, a VR experiment, where if you were a subject of that experiment, you would put VR goggles on your head, and you would be told that you're now the President of the United States. You would actually take the oath of office, and then you would be taken in the VR to a room where suddenly popping up on a screen would be all kinds of aids and assistants. And what they would tell you is, Mr. President, we have reason to believe that the US is under attack. And in 15 minutes, you're going to have to make a choice whether to launch a response or not to do anything, or launch a small response, and so on. And what happens in this experiment is that you actually live ask questions. You say, OK, what do we know about how many missiles are coming? And Sharon sits there in the back, and she kind of presses buttons like a Wizard of Oz, and she gives you answers to your questions. But essentially, all the answers you get are ambiguous. We don't really know. There's some probability it's coming from Russia, but some probability it's not. We need more time, more information. So you basically, for 15 minutes, keep getting ambiguous information that doesn't tell you much. And what she saw in her study, it's not published yet, so I'm giving you kind of prelude to what happened there, is that out of about 200 people who were in this study, 190 of them essentially chose to launch nuclear weapons, and most of them within less than 15 minutes. So about 5 minutes after, they started already a war. So the point here is that the protocol that we have right now, the human component of it, makes it very likely that not doing anything seems like a flaw. So I must do something, and do something small or big is nuclear war in whatever way you want it. I should add that of the 200 people that she studied, the majority of them were experts. It wasn't just people who never thought about it. It was people whose job is to think about nuclear weapons, and that many of them, when they took off the goggles, said something like, what did I do? I can't believe I did it. All my life, I advocated for the opposite of that. One of them started crying. So they said that something in this process makes humans do things that they don't want to do, which, if the bar that we have is just do better than humans, we're a very low bar, and I think almost every piece of code that I write right now in Python behind the scene could be better. Just one line, if don't do anything, would be a better idea. And in many ways, this is one simple suggestion that we can add to the protocol, which is take away the time. If the missiles are coming towards you, and you can't eliminate them, the idea that you have to respond very fast, knowing that the brains of humans is flawed when there's time pressure or maybe tiredness, or is by itself a mistake. Maybe we can just say something like, wait, and let the missiles hit you, and be sure that they come from where they think you come, or that you actually are correct about attribution and about the damage before you launch. And even that simple change could be a game changer in the game that we call nuclear war, because it's all predicated on humans who will make decisions fast and right. Okay, so I kind of built towards the cliffhanger, which is what did we do? And I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you what are the things that we recommend in our protocol, because unlike most of my talks, which kind of have a beginning, middle, and an end, this one doesn't really have an end. The end is my ask for you. I normally try to end with something kind of joyful and climatic, some kind of quote by Einstein or something like this. And this time, what I want to do is I want to ask for a favor. This project is right now getting a lot of interest because the probability went from very, very low to a little bit higher. And we're academics. we're not great in getting the word out. What I'm trying to do in the last couple of weeks, and this is why I'm here, and this is why I do a lot of work with Hollywood mostly, trying to get people to think about it differently, basically train the brain to think about unimaginable in a different way. In this room, we have a lot of CEOs with power. We have a lot of people in the media. And what I want is for you to ask me questions afterwards about the protocol. What did we change? What did we learn? I want you to ask me a question about what things were surprising to me when I started getting into this field and coming up with that. And I made a list of good questions for you that I'm going to read to you right now as teasers. If you've never heard about the term broken arrow, you might want to know what this is. If you've never heard about the fact that about a month ago, a missile from India was launched at Pakistan, exploded, could have been a nuclear warhead on it, just didn't, and India just said, so it's a mistake. Please ignore it and don't worry about it. Ask me what was the behind the scene of this story. Ask me about the bank robber who I got to meet, who also was in charge of the nuclear key in a missile silo. He owed money to the mafia because he was gambling in a casino, and he was trying to trade it with access to the missile silos in South Dakota. The behind the scenes of the story of Petrov. Many of you probably know about the Russian general who prevented World War III because he did not launch a counter-strike when he thought that the US has attacked him. There actually is a story that, if you don't know, is interesting in itself, but if you do know, there's actually a wrong fact about the story that I'm happy to tell any reporter who wants to correct the event of the story. You can also ask me about what we know about Putin and his decision-making right now and the protocol. So the protocol that we're working on isn't just a US protocol. We're trying to change the entire 9-country protocol in the same way. So we actually talk to people in North Korea, in China, in Russia, in Israel, in UK, in France, and we learn a lot about that. An anecdote that you might want to know is why in France is there a decision not to train the president on the protocol? Whereas in every other country you train the president, in France they have a different protocol that says don't train the president at all, which is interesting. How is it done in the UK? The only country by which it's not the prime minister alone that makes the decision, but there's actually some other people who help or actually get the authority to decide on his behalf. The football. Some of you might have heard about this little box that the president has to have next to him all the time with the codes. Let me give you kind of a kind of note. This box doesn't have any codes. There's something else in this box, and it will be interesting for all of you to know what's in this football and why this is part of the biggest flaw of the protocol. And I guess you might want to know what are our proposals when it comes to how to change the protocol and what to do about it to make the brain think about things that are unimaginable in a different way. I want to end with a quote by Einstein. Many years ago, when they were developing and building the bomb during the Manhattan Project, Einstein was asked if he knows what weapons would World War III be using. The war didn't happen, but he already knew that the bomb is being developed, and they asked him, what now the atomic bomb is World War II, what weapons would be used in World War III? And he said, I don't know about the third one, but the fourth one is going to be with arrows and sticks again, because we're going to destroy the world. And a neuroscientist like myself who never cared about that, and really is not the best person to talk about it, ventured into this field, found it fascinating, and found it something that we should all be alarmed about. I hope that I did a good job in making you think about it differently and make your brain think about the unimaginable in a different way. Thank you so much.